Tonight we have Ed Casmer, and he's going to talk to us about cloud object security and why you should be concerned with it. I'm really excited to have this talk. I am personally going through a whole bunch of security and compliance efforts at work, and we have a lot of data stored in our cloud buckets. So please teach me. And Ed, tell us a little bit about yourself and feel free to jump right in.
Excellent. All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Hello, all. Ed Casmer here. I am not in your area, but I do actually have 4 or 5 of the team are actually based right there in that area. So we have 3 or 4 engineers and some customer success and marketing all based right around there. So happy to be a part of this group, and I'm glad we've got some presence in the community as well. So my name's Ed Casmer. I've been doing security for a long time, worked for a major security vendor for good or for bad. I worked for Symantec for the last 14 years before I left to start this company. And during that time, I focused on virtualization and cloud and storage because Symantec did own Veritas for a while as well. And so I was focused on a little bit of all of that. When you've been around that long, you get to play with all the companies and products. So left there about 1.5 years ago and started this company. We've been around for about 2 years, and really glad to be talking to you here generically about what this is. You know, we've been in the space, we've talked to hundreds of customers at this point in and around this space. And so all of that is what we're going to talk about today is applicable to that. Now, I've got a bunch of slides, and I don't say that to sound daunting or anything. They are a backdrop to this discussion, and this really should be a discussion and, you know, allow us to talk through this. And can you guys see just the slides and not the presenter mode? You see just the slides?
Yes, we see slides.
Okay, perfect. All right, so we'll go through this. As I said, been in this space a while, but let's talk about it in general. I'm going to shrink all your faces. Someone on the call, if as questions come in, feel free to ask them. I don't know how you guys have done this in the past, if there is a notion to chat them in, or if you want to just unmute yourself and talk. George, you can kind of set those rules if you want, but I'm very flexible and loose. As I said, this is a discussion more than anything else, and feel free to stop me and ask me the question so we address it in real time.
If anybody posts anything in chat, I'll read it out loud for you.
Okay,
I know not everybody has their audio or their mic set up, so I'll do that. Okay,
excellent, great. And I think I have the chat screen up that I'll probably be able to see as well, but I won't be paying as much attention, so definitely let me know. I think we have a feel for what cloud object storage is, but it surprises me every time I do have a conversation with someone. It is generally the notion of taking the good things of cloud, the 5 core tenets, and applying it to storage and making it readily available. If we look at, you know, what AWS has done over the time, AWS, Azure, Google, IBM, they all have their own flavor of this. But generally speaking, we're focused in and around AWS on this conversation, but it doesn't have to be. It's been around a long time, and if you look at if you guys were around when I was around in the beginning, when AWS was first kicking off, VMware was the hot thing in kind of that 2007 era. And AWS was more like this weird lab storage kind of environment. And it was just sneaky and under the covers, just growing like crazy while VMware was taking off and had a real good 4 or 5 year run. But by the early 2000s, you could 2010s, you know, in those early first few years, you could see a real turn starting to occur, and the growth that they've seen from nothing to $1 trillion to tens of trillions in 2018 to now hundreds of trillions of objects in 2021 in particular. It's because that cloud storage is so easy to use. It's API based, so you can really access it from anywhere and deal with it within any kind of application. And we see that. And we keep seeing cloud storage grow 40% year over year. It is a sign, as you would expect any storage on-prem or in the cloud. When your storage is growing, typically your business is growing, things are growing. When storage is on the decline, your business is starting to be on the decline because things don't go away. You may shift them around and deal with them in a different way and archive them off, but your data hasn't gone away and it hasn't shrunk. Now, because it is easy to use and because it is so readily available, we are seeing lots of use cases, and you guys probably face this too. We're seeing migrations of data, whether that's on-prem stores, or what we're seeing a lot of right now is taking tape libraries out of Iron Mountain and taking tape libraries that you've got stored under your desk and shifting them all into S3 because it's cheap and it makes the data usable again. So you have access to it. So we're seeing a lot of migration, but the big thing we're seeing most is either the re-architecture of applications or just architecting of applications to leverage a centralized kind of object store rather than attached block volumes, EBS, or even network shares or file shares like EFS and EFSX, FSX. So we're seeing S3, grow more and more because it is easy, because it's accessible from any of your applications in any stage of the workflow. You don't have to worry about something being able to access that EC2 instance and pull things off the EBS storage. So centralized, easy to use, and we're seeing it as a very common thing, common workflow. So if you look at the types of folks, and you guys are probably in the same thing, you've got these workflows where you're ingesting data from some other third-party system. They're being dumped into S3, and then they're being leveraged in some capacity, whether that's a final resting place or just the next step in the workflow. They're residing in S3, and we're seeing all types of file types. It doesn't matter what it is, whether it's logging data, whether it's PII information, because you're a financial institution taking that kind of information to set up accounts for customers, or you're a mortgage application, or it's life sciences that's doing COVID research, or your life insurance doing that, or government entities. We're seeing all of these guys use S3 as the back end. There isn't a vertical, there isn't a size of a company that dictates whether you do or don't use S3 in this mix. As a result of this, and because it is so easy, and because it is so common, and because it's become such a center pin of your workflows, it's certainly become an attack vector. It is a place now where the bad guys know you're storing your stuff as well. Do some Google searches almost every single week. You'll see some aspect of an issue with cloud storage. And it's not the cloud storage itself. Most of the time it's a user issue more than anything. But if you take someone like a Twilio last summer, they made a mistake in their configuration for a short window. They actually had a really good response to it. 12-hour window, they allowed writes into their buckets that were being used as their API content distribution network. And a bad actor did, in fact, write some malicious files in there. They weren't very harmful, but they put a file in there that could have turned out to be harmful. And there were a bunch of users who downloaded it and put it into their environments. That's a simple example. Most of the examples you see are really around configuration things and exposures, whether it's government agencies losing their hacking code, or we just saw last week, one of these servers was exposed. It wasn't S3 in this case, it was actual EC2 instance, lost millions of airport workers' records, personal identifiable information. It's out there and it's a big issue. And a lot of people think, okay, well, it's not my job. It's someone else's job to solve for this. It's AWS's job to solve for this. But as we know, AWS has a shared security model, and they quickly point at you for things of this type of nature. They'll hold the keys to the castle and make sure that the same people who update hardware aren't the ones who can get into the software, and they'll manage, their hidden buildings that aren't broadcast around for where their data centers are. But you have to manage everything else. And so it is something to be concerned about. And, misconfigurations are where it's at. And the whole talk here is about how do we secure cloud storage in general. And there's two aspects to it. One is, how do we get out of our own way? How do we get out of these misconfigurations that appear to be so common that they're being updated in the news all the time? And then how, even when we are configured properly, how do we know our data is safe? And so the first thing we need to do is kind of figure out what these misconfigurations are and how do we go about it. Very simple thing, even if you start with the best of intentions, how many of you have tried to share data from S3 to someone else? It's a common thing. It's become kind of almost like a new file sync and share to an extent. Some companies use it that way. But it's not as easy as you'd like it to. You need permissions on both sides. You need to figure out how and who can access it. And do you do that through IAM roles? Do you do that on bucket policies? Where are you going to do it? And so often we get into these situations where the human side of us just says, I'm only going to do this for a minute. I'm going to open it up. You can get access to the data, and then I'll close it down, and come to find out however long later you didn't close it down. It happens way more often than not. But we're going to get into what does good configuration look like. The interesting piece here, and what we're seeing more of, is even when the configuration is good, the data itself can still be an issue. And I refer to it as the blind spot, because we so think about how do I prevent people from getting into my network and into my data sources. So I think about the edge. What am I doing at the edge? And then I might think about my workloads on how do I harden them so I don't have to worry about what's going on in those. And then I think about my users. How do I control them? How do I give them, the flexibility, but also control them in such a way that I know they can't compromise us? And so we think about different solutions. It's very often that the storage is forgotten about altogether. And when it is thought about, it's a public or private thought. Is my bucket public or private? And that's it. And generally speaking, it's okay to have both. Public buckets aren't a horrible thing, right? It's the way you may share some content. If you go to half of your log into your life insurance, not life insurance, your health insurance, and go to the website, we just switched this year to UHC, based around there as well. And I went in to look at my plan details, and it came from an S3 bucket. The URL is just S3, blah, 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 full URL to that. So everyone has something in there. So whether you're public or private, there's much more to it. Do you know what data you have up there? So if you're trying to pass compliance audits, and you're trying to ensure that you have a good grasp and you can answer an auditor that you know exactly what you have, is you have to be able to then look at the data and classify it and figure it out. Do you know how it's being used and who's using it? And then do you know whether it's safe or not? And so this is what we need to solve. And so this is a blind spot that everyone thinks about the configuration, but doesn't think about the data. Now, the real question is, why should you think about the data? The reason is that S3 is now a top 5 threat. It came in at number 4 for blocked downloaded malware. Now, why is this? It's if you look at what 1, 2, and 3 and are, it's Google Drive, it's OneDrive, and it's email, it's cloud email applications. That I would expect. Those are file sync and shares. Those are shares that people treat as normal drives on their systems. But S3 is not typically one of those things that you treat as a normal drive. And I like it. Not that you would typically treat that way. So why is it a top 5, number 4 blocked malware download? It's because all those applications, as mentioned before, are there. How is the data getting in there? Well, it's from perfectly acceptable means, not just because it was a public or misconfigured bucket, but because applications allow untrusted users or unknown users to upload data into them, and they reside in the S3 bucket. And then that data is used by others, whether that's the public or employees or business partners. It's there and used. So it creates a lot of risk in and of itself to allow that data to just be mass used. I've got an example of a learning management system. So there's an LMS, there's a lot of LMSs as a service that have popped up. Different companies provide it in different ways. LMS allows third-party vendors to put their training content into their system, and then students consume that through their LMS platform. And had a customer recently have about 50 of their students get infected and have their systems start to be taken over for ransomware and the like, because the third-party business partner who stores their learning material there was infected in some fashion and uploaded the content into the LMS system. So that's a simple example, and not a huge blowout, not a huge impact with only 50 students getting infected, but it's still a big deal that you can see on a more extreme example if you've got a broader adopted or used website, you could see how that could have a massive impact. And so you have to think about these risks. One, on the upstream side, where is my data coming from? Do I trust these people? And two, even if I trust the data coming in, who are my consumers? And if I've got a lot of consumers that I don't have control over their systems because they're not my employees, then I may have to reconsider that data before I share with all these people. As far as compliance goes, there are a lot of standards that do require the scanning of all your data. I have argued with customers many times at this point, and you guys may feel some of this yourself, and so it'd be interesting to get that feedback, that those standards don't apply to my cloud data. This is what they tell me. It applies to my endpoints, it applies to my network attached storage, my on-prem stuff, but when PCI 5.1 says, hey, you should scan all your data and make sure it's clean for use, they're like, no, that doesn't count for S3. That's not the same thing. I think what we're going to find, and when I talk to the auditors and we go through this, whether it's ISO or SOC 2 has come up a lot lately with scanning your data when you're a SOC 2 vendor, and in PCI, it's coming up more and more that cloud storage is becoming part of that list and does need to be scanned in order to tick those compliance boxes. So you may or may not want to agree to that yet, but you will agree to it in time, because I don't think there's any getting away from it with the prevalence of what S3 has been producing for folks. So with that in mind, you need some way to clean that data and figure it out. There's a handful of ways to do it, and we'll talk about that as well. So, all right, let's get the basics under control. First of all, you've got to be aware of what happens in your environment. You've got to own the configuration and really know what it is and what's going on with it. And then you need to go through the rest of these pieces. Know how your data is used, know who's using it, and know where it's coming from. And so that will involve the notion of knowing what your data is some form of classification, knowing that it's safe to use is some form of malware scan, and there's a bunch of different ways to do this. And the first parts are just making sure you're on top of your configurations. So the first thing I'd say for this is make sure you're aware of changes, whether you've got some sort of cloud security posture management tool in place. You could go with a cloud custodian kind of open source version. Maybe you have a bigger name brand version of that security posture management. That will give you the idea of changes in fairly real time as they're happening. So you're not a Twilio that accidentally opened up writes, because maybe you should never have writes on any of those. It should be reads. They should be public, but it should be read-only public and not writes. And so having something that helps keep you on top of that is a great place to start. And then after that, it really is understanding how and who is using your data. So then you can determine, is public or private okay for this? Do I have versioning turned on? Do I have object lock turned on? Why are those things important now? Because if you do have misconfigurations, an MFA delete or an object lock can prevent you from having your whole S3 estate ransomed off to you. We had this happen, and there were some pen testers that wrote about this in the last year, which was interesting. It's an interesting read. Customer had their configuration kind of out there, didn't have, had permissions rights on. The person set up their own encryption key in their own account for their buckets and re-encrypted or encrypted all of the files in the buckets, left them there for the people. But because that account didn't have access to decrypt from this other key, they effectively ransomed their entire S3 estate to this customer, and basically said, you want it, you pay, and we'll give you the key so you can decrypt. But with something like MFA delete or object lock, and because object store behaves differently than file stores, when you create a copy of an object or you try to overwrite an object, it creates a new copy of that object. And if you don't have MFA delete or object lock on, they can overwrite the existing object. But if you have that on, it can only create a new one. So you'd have your unencrypted one and your encrypted one right next to it. So it's a simple way, if you put MFA delete on, it's a simple thing to do to help make sure that that can never happen.
With that cross account KMS. I assume it was KMS encryption in the
That's right.
bucket that they did, right?
Yeah, that's right.
What always kind of surprises me is how little Amazon would help you with that.
Yeah.
Like, you have the ARN, you know which account did this. Find
Yeah.
them and have them undo it.
Yeah. Agreed.
It's just
That
so shocking. They don't
yeah.
care.
Is there anyone from AWS on here? I'll just say
No.
I agree with you. It doesn't matter if they are or not. I concur with you on that sentiment. Agreed. Sentiment. All right. Now, the understanding your flows and usage, I think this is an interesting one because I see so many different pieces now. You know, we talk to folks in the government, and for whatever reason, they have some of their users are allowed to use CLI. Some have access to the AWS console and they do uploads, and others are using one of their delivered applications. So they don't have nearly the control as they should. I mean, you can control every one of those independently, but as you become one of the largest entities in the government and you go through this process, it becomes much, much harder to control. And so you've got all these different data sources coming in, and you need to be able to still control all of them no matter how the data comes in. And then this notion of, do you trust the entities? I'll talk to you on the next slide on an example of a specific media company that we're dealing with and what they go through. But again, it's about thinking, where is it coming from and who's it going to, and can I control that? Now, this is not that hard to do. This is just trying to get a clear understanding of your data and your storage. And once you have that, then everything else is easy. It's just getting it back into place. And you know, when we talk about these, do I trust my data sources versus do I trust or understand the risk for the consumers? We are working with a news organization, a major news organization, and any content they generate themselves on their own cameras and in their own trucks, they trust pretty good. They have a high trust for that. Any content that comes from regional affiliates, they mostly trust. It's not, they don't consider it their equipment and trucks, so they give it a lower trust score. And then everyone these days loves crowdsourced materials. So if I'm out at an event and I'm taking a video and I upload it from my phone, they don't trust that at all. And so that gets a very low trust score. And so they may weight their data differently because it's not all the same. And so they may choose what does and doesn't get scanned and what they are or are not concerned about. But then when you look at them having millions and millions of consumers of the data, that is considered a high risk. And so they have to make sure that that data is good and safe before they share it out. And instead of having 50 students get infected, they could have millions of end user consumers of their news information, and that would be a major problem. So how do we solve for this? The solving for this is comes in the form of, one, know what your data is. And that's not just classification. That is the notion of understanding all those previous factors of where is it coming from, who's consuming it, and what kind of data is it? Are they executables? Are they PDFs that could have embedded ransomware in it? There's a lot to figure out there, but as long as you have a feel for what the type of data should be, you know that mislabeled data can't come in and surprise someone. But then I think, okay, let's put some tools in place, and how do you go about it? And have any of you solved for this before? Have any of you had to do some AV projects or do other projects to put security in and around your S3 bucket so far?
We've done a little bit, you know, but it's more been around like enforcing encryption at rest, forcing all via service control policies. The idea behind it mostly being, don't let our end users be stupid. Don't allow them to make it public. You know, there's a special IAM role specifically designed that we have that allows S3 buckets to be turned public. So by default, nobody can do it, if that makes sense. Things like that.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's excellent. That's good. So that's a great intro into all this. So the first place I would start is that. I would start with my IAM policies or my bucket policies. And those would be the first two places to start and figure this out. And he said through SCP, so he's got organizations in place and he's leveraging those kind of global organization rules to trickle down into his accounts, into his users. And that's a very good way to do it as well. But that's your starting point. You know, we've got a bunch of folks too that think about, okay, well, how else can I secure it? You can bring in VPC endpoints and you can put policies and controls around the endpoint to help satisfy and drive who can have access. Is it coming from a specific VPC and block everyone else? You can just make sure that the traffic goes over the AWS backbone. So that's a great way to do it as well. But I agree 100% is we try to make it so users can't be stupid. And we try to make it so the applications that may be the interface to the user, and so the user themselves aren't doing things, but doing it through config and those policies is a great standpoint. That's a great place to start. I agree 100% that that's how it should be done, or at least started. The problem with that is, as we stated, even when you have the proper controls in place, the data itself can be the harmful thing. And it wasn't the configuration that's making you lose data. So you're not having a loss of data like that, but you're having the importation of malicious data that can then be safely consumed, but it turns out to be unsafely consumed. So yeah, that's a problem. So on top of that, okay, we've got the policies in place. 100% agree with that. We have some sort of configuration tool to bring us kind of real-time awareness to make sure dumb things don't happen, whether that's config policies inside of AWS, or whether that's a posture management tool from any named vendor out there, or open source tools like I said, Cloud Custodian. What I've seen with talking to customers there are ways to build your own AV solutions as well. You can build with open source tools out there. We are a solution that fits into this as well, but I'm not here to sell you my wares at the moment, but we can talk about how this is done. I mean, that's the reality of it. If you go out and do a search on some blogs, how do I do S3 protection? You'll find 5 or 6 blogs. There's typically one written per year. And I went back recently, and over the last 6 years, there have been one good one per year over the last 6 years of how do I do this? They all boil down to Lambda and ClamAV, and I'm going to build a Lambda to do scanning of my S3 objects. That is a reasonable way to do it. But what's funny is you see that this is coming up year over year over year. So it's not just a widely accepted, adopted solution. It is one that's doable. And in this case, you take ClamAV, an open source scanning utility, you throw it in a Lambda, which has its own limitations, and then you scan as you can go. And there are some things where it's hard to manage. How do you deal with bigger files? How do you deal with updates? It's slow depending on if you want a real-time scan, but it's certainly acceptable. So one thing you can do is build your own, and you can take those Lambdas or take some other mechanism and try to do that integration yourself. And like I said, you'll find 5 or 6 decent blogs over the last year talking about that very thing and how you do it. And that's something that can be done. The other things you can look at are if you have some security platforms in place already, like if you're a big cloud consumer, you may have a large platform in place and you might be able to tack this onto that. If you don't have a large platform in place, then it becomes harder to go with any of the name brand vendors at this point, because they want to sell you a giant platform when maybe you're just trying to deal and manage your storage aspects to this. And so it can be expensive and complicated, but it's doable. And then there are some other vendors out there that are doing it. We happen to be one of them, and build a solution that allows for classification and cleanliness of your data, so you know what's up there and you know it's clean and safe to use. But you know, where we walk into a lot of customers' shops at this point is that they've got to build your own. So it's doable, and we can kind of go back and forth on like, okay, if I were building it today, which I did, how would I do it? And I debated early on whether I should go Lambdas or not, and Lambdas just had too many limitations. But if you look at Fargate clusters, we used Fargate and delivered it as the kind of better improved Lambda. They're scalable, they're flexible, they don't have to be persistent if you don't want. So you can have you have the flexibility of Lambda, but the improvement, because you can have some persistence if you want, you can have long running workloads. So if you're looking to do something along these lines, I think that's a better approach as you go down that road when you're looking at it. But I'll take any questions on how to deliver this, but it's an interesting thing that if you're trying to put the solution in place, how do you do it and how do you manage it? And it can be done on your own, but it's a little bit harder and more expensive than people think it's going to be to build out that Lambda solution. Because as you get into file types, file sizes over certain sizes, you have to bring in things like EFS and other things. And EFS, if any of you have used EFS or not, it's dog slow and it's expensive if you want it to be have a decent response time. So they give you a little bit of bursting. That bursting goes away, very fast, and then everything after that reduces to 15 megabit per second or less as a file system, which is just dog slow. So things get expensive and crazy on how to do it.
Not to compete with you, but my first thought was using Spark with EMR to go over S3 buckets. That should be able to churn through some data quick.
And by the way, I don't mind you competing with me or throwing other things. I really don't. Like, Amazon has a blog out right now that talks about using the CDK and CLAM to go and do this. And the reason I don't mind is because it's not sustainable for a company long-term to run their own solution. I keep finding this out over and over again. So I don't mind having this wide open, loose conversation. And I really don't mind if other solutions are built around me, in-house, because it happens all the time and we replace them all the time. So it doesn't hurt my feelings. And I really don't want this to be a sales job. I want this to be let's have the discussion around securing this. So I think the comments earlier about the policies, IAM and buckets and SCPs was super helpful. So I think that's good. And I hope more people have more comments on it.
So I will say that one of the things that we've noticed, because we're scaling to tens to hundreds of AWS accounts with more of a design of each team gets their own like dev, QA, stage, and prod environment.
Yep.
One of the things that I've been noticing is the tools that you need to build a scalable cloud platform is something that you can deploy over and over and over again into each environment. So like whatever this solution is that scans the Lambda, whether it's put object or whatever, it needs to be able to scale to hundreds of AWS accounts that can all be managed the same way. So because the problem you get into is you get the problem of, well, some people are creating S3 buckets manually. Some people are using something like CDK. Some people are using CloudFormation. Some people are using Terraform. And you're never going to find a solution that you can say, all right, as part of your CI/CD pipeline, inject this like Lambda. Instead, you have to think about it more of, well, maybe you have a solution that has a Lambda function that finds all S3 buckets in the account that then writes them to a DynamoDB table or something. And then it creates Fargate tasks to scan through the data, or maybe it decides to, hook into the events API of any new S3 bucket. You have to be a little bit more loose with it, and you have to be willing to develop the solution that can handle any use case where these buckets can show up. And then once you've kind of matured that solution, then you just need to deploy it a couple hundred times across all of your AWS accounts. And that's effectively the only way that I've seen these type of solutions actually scale well, is you have to bake it into, you know how to scan each thing, and you can deploy it, in every account that you have.
Yeah, I love that comment. That's so good. And I will say we've already solved for that in mind, but you teed up such a good thing. If you look at AWS's, so the alternative to what you're saying, instead of deploying it over and over again, is to follow a landing zone or a control tower type approach where you can deploy it. You can have a centralized security services account, deploy a solution there, and then manage all the other accounts that are related in and around that from that one spot. Lambda, any solution, Lambda included, I agree with you, Nicholas, is a complicated one where, let's say I installed the Lambdas just in one account, and I did have a discovery of linked accounts to go and find those buckets, and I could put either event-based listeners on top of the S3 buckets or some other mechanism where I could have automated protection. You still have to manage and make sure that the Lambdas have permissions in both ways, and that all of this two-way traffic between the centralized account and the many other linked accounts have that access. But you're absolutely correct. That is definitely a complication. So you either one, need to be able to redeploy the solution in a generic fashion across all the accounts, or you need to have a centralized mechanism that makes it really simple to try to manage all the accounts at the same time. And both are complicated to stand up on your own, in my mind, but they are doable. So I think that your point is 100% valid.
Yeah, I mean, where I see a lot of these type of solutions going are they're becoming much more turnkey. So
Yeah.
I know this is completely out of left field, but if you give me a little rope, Amazon Workspaces is a very expensive service, but it's one of those things where you can deploy with like on demand, or you can have it where the pricing is based on per user. And so AWS makes it kind of hard to know, what's the threshold? Is it 30 hours a week, 40 hours a week to determine? Well, then what they do is they come up with a solution where it spins up a Fargate container once every day. It runs for like 30 seconds and it calculates how long the user is using the service, and it automatically switches them between on demand and full. And the point I'm trying to make here is that solution could work for any VDI solution, no matter how many times you need it across a large enterprise. And that's where I see a lot of these security tools going as well, which is how can I make it easy to be in the cloud and also have the safety to go along with it, along with cost control and everything else. And those are the types of solutions that I think get very, very good in the cloud, because now you can deploy them as many times as you need, or in the centralized case, with a landing zone environment and things like that as well. But you get the basic idea. The point I'm trying to make is you need to make almost everything turnkey.
100%. It's got to be super simple, or else it's not realistic to manage your environment with something that takes a lot of hand-holding and a lot of touching. So I am in full agreement with that. Love it. Great comments on that, and appreciate the interaction so far. There's at least 2 people listening and 2 people commenting between George and Nicholas. So I'll take that as a win.
I see Ed smiling in there.
Yeah, Ed's there. I see he's one of the 3 people still showing their faces. So he's like right there in my view. So I'll give him credit for that at least as well.
I've spoken at a meetup not too long ago, and one person kept their camera on, and it was like, it kept me going, so I'm like, I'm going to keep my camera on.
Oh, that's real. That's very real. So building on slightly what Nicholas was just talking about is, how do you make it repeatable, and how do you do this? Because if you want to turn compliance into assurance and safety into assurance, and know that it's going to be doable, it's got to be something that can be automated the best it can. It's got to be easy to deploy, and it's got to be repeatable. So you figure out what your process is, you understand your data, you define it. I think Nicholas commented with the controls that they put in place with the SCPs. That's like the start of helping define this. You put those into the tools, you get that into place, and then any linked account that comes into your organization, any new bucket that pops up, you can start to put those controls around it and make it repeatable, whether that's automatically turning on event-based scanning, like discovering and understanding that the bucket exists and turning on protection for it, or whether that's just being made aware that a new bucket has come into place, especially if you have the rules in place that doesn't allow a user to create a public bucket in some fashion. Then you're ahead of the game already with some of that. Then, of course, if you're really trying to turn this into assurance and finalize this thing all the time and get your high trust score and prove to auditors that you're doing the things that you say you're doing, you have to be able to record and report it. You have to be able to come out of the other side and say, yes, I in fact did do this. And this is what my environment looks like and how I went about it. And here are the rules and the policies that I've put in place to do that. So it's got to have all of these pieces and brought together. And I agree, it's a challenging aspect, as Nicholas brought up. There's a lot of moving parts. It's doable. It's absolutely doable on your own. It's easier with tools. as he also talked about, the idea that someone brought up another tool, AWS provided something that can help, calculate and move you around. I love it. And I love Fargate too, because Fargate is billed by the minute. It's not billed by the hour. So you don't have to worry about either a Lambda that's going to run out of time trying to calculate all of that through your entire environment for you, or you don't have to worry about an EC2 instance that's going to charge you for a full hour, even if it only runs for 3 minutes. Fargate, runs for 3 minutes. It charges you for 3 minutes, and it spins up, and it's cheap compared to EC2, or at least it's comparable and slightly less than EC2 in most cases. So it's a great solution to bring more and more things into to make it easier to manage as well, and really be cost effective. All right, the main thing that came out of this is be worried about your storage. I mean, ultimately, no matter how good your configuration is and how much control you have over your policies, there's still a chance that the data itself is the problem. It's not your configuration. You didn't have a lapse of control and lose all your data. You're not the next news story that lost 40 million records of someone, of your customers or employees, but you still have malicious data up there that's being blocked and turning into a major threat vector for all of your consumers of that data. I think a lot of people originally thought S3 would just be a dumping ground for quote unquote dead data, kind of like those tapes offsite right now. But it's just turned into the opposite. It is the everyday usage of it that makes it a scary place and the attack vector of a lot of bad people out there. Now, with that in mind, everyone loves a checklist. You can't go wrong with the checklist, and I should have made like check boxes in here or whatever and not numbered them, but take this with you. I'm not going to go through all of this, but when you're going through this and working with your own environment, or if you work with customers' environments in their AWS, ask these types of questions and make sure you have an understanding for each. So you have a real good feel for whether you're safe or not, whether your data is safe to be consumed or not. And you can go through and spend some time with this as well. Now, if you do take some time and go check us out, we do have a couple things going on out there. We have free trials for it all. I'm not here to sell you that. If you end up using something, that's great. Reach out to me and I'll give you a little kicker as part of the free trial if you need to, just for the fun of it. I don't think I'm allowed to do that, but I can do whatever I want. So I'll throw
You're the CTO. You do what you want.
I'm a decision maker, damn it. I'm a people person. We can hook you up with something in the trial and stuff if you came through this effort, but not that matters. The reason that I think it's valid to have this conversation is I've talked to hundreds of customers, both here and at my previous gig, around this very topic, and I see it as a real threat, and I see it as a real problem that doesn't have a lot of good solutions for it. And so I'm just going to stop there. I'm going to open it up to any more questions or comments that we have, and I'll take anything and everything. It can be out of left field. I don't mind one bit. I will not take any heartburn from anyone's comments or questions or concerns. So open forum.
I saw a new camera turn on.
So I have a theoretical question, but I think I already am going to know what the answer is. So the number one problem that I see with any company that is trying to compete within the cloud space, but specifically Amazon has this knack of eating everyone's lunch. Cisco comes out with a router that allows you to create a transit account. Well, Cisco 2 years later creates a transit gateway and eats the entire lunch of that Cisco. And yep. Same thing with security tooling is a constant thing as well. They're constantly bringing in things like Guard Duty and Amazon Macy, and one of the things that Amazon has, I think it's having a little bit of a Google problem. It's having this thing where they keep on generating services that makes it harder and harder to use the cloud in a safe, scalable way for a large enterprise. But at the same time, I think it also makes people like you have a harder job because you're constantly trying to justify why your service hasn't been eaten by one of the many reInvent announcements this year, for a lack of a better term.
Yeah, no, it's real. Yeah.
So I guess, from your perspective, like, where do you see this going in the next year, 3 years, 5 years? Like, it feels like the cloud providers are trying to make it so you don't need third-party providers, that they can do
Yes.
everything for you. But what would you say to that as a general strategy? And the reason where I'm coming from, I've been in the cloud, I've been working in the cloud for 7, 8, 9 years, and the number one problem we've had, healthcare company, has been operational cost of EC2 to make it sure everything's patched, up to date, has IDS and all these other things on it to check off the check boxes. It's kind of a drag. It's a headache. So we've been noticing that the further we move into managed services, the easier everything gets, because the audits are not there yet, is part of the reasoning. But the other reason is, well, you don't have to talk about patching if you don't actually own the compute that's running your code. So
Yeah.
I'm just curious what your thoughts are in that area.
So I'll make a couple different statements here. You're not wrong, and I saw this. I don't know if you guys were back in the day in 2007 to 2010. VMware loved their partners. It was all partner first. We love them. They're building solutions for it. 2010, 2011, VMware said, "Oh, I need to make some more money, and I'm going to start taking my partners' money." And they were not very partner friendly as much after that. Every single cloud platform is the same thing. Everyone is partner friendly until they realize they can make money out of it themselves. So I would say in the next few years, and really the next 2 years probably, AWS will have something in this space that we'll be competing against for sure. They don't today, and won't. I think they're behind and won't for a couple of years, and so I think we're okay there. Do I know it's coming? Absolutely, it's coming. I think how do you combat that? You try to be better, and you try to be, which is hard in some cases. It's not that hard with Microsoft. It's harder with AWS, although AWS under the covers is held together with baling wire and duct tape kind of things. So there's a lot of things there that you just have to try to stay accelerated ahead of. And then you have to start to branch out to more platforms. You have to be able to say, oh, we're cross cloud, we're cross platform. I think that's the only other way you start to compete, is any other vendor out there says, okay, we can support you across many more platforms. As far as your pains and troubles with your endpoints, 100% agree on that. Good. So workload behavior enforcement, if you can harden it to the point you don't care about it, we used to say, oh, you can harden this thing that your last rack of shame, the one thing that can't be moved to the cloud and is no longer supported, you can protect that thing well enough by it being hardened that you never have to worry about the vulnerability. Might make life easier, but you're right. There's no getting around that. There's no getting around the cost and expense of that and making sure it's in place, unless you can decouple the workload, the worker node from the brains or the configuration, and then they can just be transient and you can toss them as you see fit and just bring up the latest image from Amazon. But there's no easy solution to that, but there are some ways to get around it for sure.
Sure. It's interesting because, we have experienced EFS, the slowness and the issues that you were referring to. Yeah. So like trying to add any kind of scanning of data using EFS is a non-starter, just because of how slow it is already, let alone, S3 and EBS. Those are, at least you could see how you could do it with those ones, but EFS, you just couldn't even start.
Yeah. Well, and there are, you can pay for sustained bursting of your data, but it is really expensive. So expensive, in fact, that we have a large media company who said, I've got these multi-terabyte files. And I said, okay, well, just, the chances of malware being in those, slim to none, but okay, you want to scan them, go ahead, we'll help you scan them. And they said, we need a solution for that. How are you going to do it? And Fargate recently came out, not recently, last year, they came out with expanded native disk container size, which is up to 200 gigs now. It used to be 10, then it went to 20, and they were all proud of that. Then they went to 200. And we asked them, and we've got regular conversations with their PMs for a much larger size, and they couldn't accommodate us yet. So we decided to spin up an EC2 based an EC2 instance inside of ECS, And so we're using that instead of the Fargate option, we're using that. And then we can attach any kind of EBS we want to it, all in real time through code as we spin it up. Do the big file with a good fast disk, EBS disk attached, and then throw the whole thing away. So we spin it up just long enough to scan it and then tear it all back down. And we do that each time a big file comes through. But you're right, it's that notion of, okay, I can spin it up, not even worry about it because I know it's not going to live long, throw it away, have a little bit reduction of cost there. And EC2 inside of ECS is now, as of a month or two ago, billed by the minute as well. And not billed by the hour, so it's another good thing that if you're running under the ECS framework, you can save on costs on that too. But yeah, EFS is 100% non-starter. Agreed, 100% with that. Was there something in the comments, George? I haven't really been looking, but maybe that's just you in the comments.
No, it's just me. So on the billing, I thought all EC2s were at like a per minute basis. And I dug up something on the EC2 pricing page that even mentioned per second.
Okay, I didn't think that was the case on anything outside of ECS.
I'm not.
Maybe I missed it too. Maybe I haven't. I blew it.
They've generally been getting everything down to the lowest. Like it used to be every 100 milliseconds with Lambda. Now it's per millisecond. EC2's down to the second as well. Yeah, they've been just slowly bringing everything down to being able to know exactly when it's in use.
Okay.
I'm not sure about EBS though. So if you have an EBS backed EC2, what's the billing period for the EBS volume? Somebody want to do some homework and go look at it? That'd be great.
I'm pretty sure it's the fraction of the month that you had it running, if you, as long as you persist it. At what, 5 cents a gig or something like that.
It also includes the IOPS though too, doesn't it?
Yeah, but and you can pick which one that you're doing. Yeah. And the EC2 will impact that as well. So if you pick an EC2 for like our large file scanning, we pick an EC2 that has a really good network card attached to it, so it has better throughput than some of the other EC2s, and that impacts the EBS IOPS as well. So that's good to know, because I was still under the assumption it was only in ECS that it got the reduction. So that's really good to know that EC2 as a whole has done that. I don't like to do anything in EC2 if we can help it, but it's still good to know.
Yeah, I avoid EC2 like the plague now.
Other comments or questions? I was trying to remember, George, what you said the little write-up of this meeting was. Did I cover all those topics? And if not, what did I miss? And let's answer anyone else's thoughts or questions or comments.
The big one for me was some compliance assurance, and I've written some things down to take back to work. So thank you.
Excellent, good.
How to best protect your company, customers, and partners. Why organizations need to take the security of storage and data in it more seriously. I think we've hit on those items.
All right.
I mean, yeah, everything that was in the abstract has been talked about, at least something.
Nailed it. Velazar knew what he was doing when he wrote that up, so that's good.
Good job.
I don't need to just stand here and look good in front of the mountains for you guys for a long time. That's actually just right outside my house. Actually, that's just right there. But it's covered in white now. It's all snow covered, but that was in October. But I mean, I'm really happy to take questions and comments and help you figure out what you might else do in and around this stuff if needed. But it sounds like from the different comments that were made, people have a pretty good amount of control over this so far. Whether you're scanning your data or not, you should probably be doing something around that, whether it's with us or someone else, or your own homegrown solution. It doesn't matter. It's just something you should probably do.
Oh, this has been great. Definitely thank you. And all right, thanks everybody for joining. Thank you, Ed, for presenting. That was most interesting. And sorry for that little Zoom bomber, but that'll be all right. https://rock.dev if you want to join our Slack workspace or get our bi-weekly newsletter. That should be coming out in a couple of days, actually, newsletter. So yeah, happy hacking, everybody.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.